Ninja Pressure Cooker Recipes. Ninja Foodi XL Steam Fryer with SmartLid. Cooking breakfast in the Ninja Foodi. For this review, I decided to make a week's worth of meals in the Foodi. That included breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and dessert. I liked some of these meals so much, particularly the breakfast and lunch options, that I repeated a few of them. French toast. I saw a recipe for French toast sticks on Ninja's website. I went with it because that dish is pretty easy, and the Ninja recipe was pretty basic. This was the first thing I cooked in the Ninja Foodi, and it was a hit. I air-fried it for 10 minutes total, flipping it halfway in between. It was perfectly crispy on the outside and soft on the inside, which is exactly how I like it. This is the best French toast I've made at home, and I have made a lot of French toast at home. Sausage, egg, and cheese crescent rolls. These took a little bit extra of time, but came out perfectly. Using the Sear function, I cooked a single egg, mixed with a bit of milk as I would on a stovetop to scramble it. Then I popped that in the fridge to cool off, because otherwise the egg's heat would cause the roll to fall apart. Once the eggs were cool, I wrapped a bit of egg, cheddar cheese, and a frozen sausage link into a crescent roll and air-fried them for 7 minutes. It was super simple and tasted amazing. Fried egg on a bagel. Earlier this year, I learned you can fry an egg in an air fryer, right on top of your bread of choice. Of course, I had to replicate this in the Foodi because it is a really easy breakfast, and you can cook everything almost at once. I popped my egg, bottom half of a bagel, and frozen sausage in the Foodi and air-fried all three for about 4 minutes. I didn't air-fry the top of the bagel at first, because I learned previously that without an egg on top, that piece will overcook and burn. Once that was done, I popped the other half of the bagel into the Foodi, and set everything to air fry for another 4 minutes. The egg looked weird at the end but tasted good enough, so I only dinged a point here for the presentation. Cooking lunch in the Ninja Foodi. Making the lunch recipes in the Foodi were the fastest meals to cook in this entire experiment, as the lunch recipes often featured the air fry function. Pizza bagels. These pizza bagels tasted awesome and took less than 10 minutes to make. The only reason it doesn't get a 10 out of 10 is that the pepperoni flew off the bagels in the baking process, so some pepperoni slices were overcooked and others weren't cooked enough. But I imagine I can futz around with the settings a few times to get it exactly how I want it and hopefully keep my pepperonis from going rogue. Ranch chicken tenders. For this lunch, I followed Kraft's own recipe for air-fried ranch chicken tenders. They take less than 10 minutes to make, and all you need are breadcrumbs, a ranch seasoning packet, and chicken. The only reason this didn't get a 10 out of 10 rating is that the basket in the Foodi made it a little awkward to flip the tenders halfway through, and I lost some breading in the process because of that. Otherwise, the outside was crispy and the chicken was still so juicy inside that I didn't even need a dipping sauce. Cooking lunch in the Ninja Foodi. Making the lunch recipes in the Foodi were the fastest meals to cook in this entire experiment, as the lunch recipes often featured the air fry function. Pizza bagels. These pizza bagels tasted awesome and took less than 10 minutes to make. The only reason it doesn't get a 10 out of 10 is that the pepperoni flew off the bagels in the baking process, so some pepperoni slices were overcooked and others weren't cooked enough. But I imagine I can futz around with the settings a few times to get it exactly how I want it and hopefully keep my pepperonis from going rogue. Ranch chicken tenders. For this lunch, I followed Kraft's own recipe for air-fried ranch chicken tenders. They take less than 10 minutes to make, and all you need are breadcrumbs, a ranch seasoning packet, and chicken. The only reason this didn't get a 10 out of 10 rating is that the basket in the Foodi made it a little awkward to flip the tenders halfway through and I lost some breading in the process because of that. Otherwise, the outside was crispy and the chicken was still so juicy inside that I didn't even need a dipping sauce. Cooking dinner in the Ninja Foodi. Cooking dinner in the Foodi was definitely the most labor-intensive. These recipes often used several different Foodi functions, and for some recipes, you cook 2 different parts of the meal at the same time. Turkey meatballs and pasta. When I went to cook this recipe, the Ninja Kitchen website was down. I had to do a lot of Google searches to see how to make meatballs and pasta in the Foodi. Eventually I found a method for cooking the meatballs for 10 minutes, 5 on each side using the air fryer setting, and they came out perfectly, crisp on the outside but juicy on the inside. I'll definitely use this method to cook meatballs in the future. The pasta was a different story. I'd pre-bought ingredients based on the recipe, which called for using jarred pasta sauce, but I had no idea how to cook the pasta in the sauce in the Foodi. After several panic searches, I found out you can just pressure cook pasta for half the suggested time on the box. I cooked the pasta in the full jar of sauce and then added water to the mix until the pasta was completely covered. I don't understand why people use this method to cook pasta, as it isn't any faster than using a stovetop. Don't get me wrong, the pasta came out great and I enjoyed it, but this function is not faster or easier, so I do not get the point of it. Teriyaki glazed chicken and white rice. I am embarrassed to admit that I've never cooked rice before. I've made instant rice in the microwave and that is certainly not the same. I always thought of cooking rice as a daunting task and I was shocked to learn how easy it is. This dish was by far the easiest and one of the best things I made in the Foodi. The recipe was very simple. It's definitely not authentic chicken teriyaki, but still delicious. I marinated the chicken for 24 hours and then, after washing my rice, put everything in the Foodi together. Using the steam and crisp feature, you put the rice, plus water and butter, in the pot while the chicken goes on the rack above it on tin foil. The end result was some of the fluffiest rice I've ever eaten and perfectly cooked chicken. Chicken pot pie. This was the absolute best meal that I made in the Foodi. I will think about this pot pie for a long time. My family grew up loving this dish, so I carted the Foodi over to my parents' house for the weekend and made this with my dad. I will say, for a large kitchen appliance, it was actually easy to transport. This was definitely a trust the process situation. You have to use 3 functions: sear/saute, pressure cook, and broil. The first half of the meal is very simple, essentially the same as cooking the inside of the pot pie on a stovetop. Then you switch to pressure cook, so the chicken cooks all the way through. After that, you have to wait for it to depressurize before you can open the Foodi, add the crust, and broil it. If the meal didn't taste so damn good, I'd have dinged the rating for being such an ordeal. But this meal was so good that my dad literally licked the plate, so it gets the perfect 10. Cooking dessert and snacks in the Ninja Foodi. Crusty bread. As soon as I opened to recipe book inside and saw the words crusty bread, I knew I needed to make it. It only required one ingredient I didn't have, yeast, and everything else, flour, salt, and olive oil, was already in my kitchen cabinet. It took 10 minutes to mix everything together and knead the dough until it was no longer sticky. Then it required 3 stages in the Foodi. This was a bit tedious, but simple enough to do and required virtually no effort or skill on my part. You use the Foodi's proof setting twice, 50 minutes each time, then you use the steam and crisp feature for 20 minutes to cook it. The steam and crisp feature requires a bit of water in the pot, while the bread bakes on the rack above it. It steams for 5 minutes, then bakes for 20 minutes. It is a 2-hour process at least, but I'd definitely do it again for fresh bread that is super soft on the inside and crusty on the outside. This seems to be shorter than regular oven methods for baking bread, as many suggest letting the dough rise in the fridge for hours ahead of baking, and this only needed to use the proof function in the Foodi for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Cake. The only reason this is getting any rating outside of 0 is that it did eventually cook the cake and it tasted great. But the process and outcome were bad. The point of the Foodi is to make you not want to use other appliances. But in order to bake a cake, you need a water bath and a separate pan, not included, to place on the rack inside of the Foodi. While this isn't that hard, in the end it's not easier than using an oven because of how awkward it is getting the pan on the rack inside of the Foodi while the cake mix is unbaked. I tried a coffee cake recipe I saw online that used boxed mix, and that was a huge mistake. It made the baking time much longer, as I used sour cream instead of oil and I added brown sugar, walnuts, and cinnamon to the mixture. The brown sugar topping was burnt before the center of the cake even started to bake. Clearly, I should have just baked a plain box cake and maybe my results wouldn't have been so wonky. After nearly 45 minutes of baking, it did cook but the top was burnt and the bottom was stuck to the pan, despite a very generous amount of cooking spray. In the future, I'll 100% stick to baking a cake in the oven. Reese's Cup S'mores. This is one of the easiest snacks to make, and I am mad I never thought of this on my own. Using the broil function, you get the Reese's Cup all melty and the marshmallow gooey, while the bottom graham cracker gets toasty and warm. It was a very simple dessert snack, but an excellent choice and something I will 100% repeat. Is the Ninja Foodi worth it? For one person, this might be too much, but when I cooked dinner with my family, each recipe was perfect, enough for everyone, plus some leftovers for lunch the next day. When I made any dinner recipe for just myself, it was way too much food. The Foodi can make leftovers for a few days, which means you can easily meal prep for an entire week in most likely under 1 hour, as many of these recipes only took 30 minutes to make.